How does a Democrat become a presidential nominee? By people voting in primaries and caucuses, right? Well, turns out it's pretty complex. It includes party insiders, a lot of money, the media, and regular voters.
The presidential nominating process is complicated.
Grueling.
Important.
I think it's exciting.
We're going to walk you through this process, which happens every 4 years, and explore why some people think the path to the White House should be different. If you watch the news, you've probably heard of this.
Primaries. We begin with the New Hampshire primary.
Primary elections.
Primary day.
But what even is a primary? It's a series of votes held state by state where people elect delegates to represent their chosen nominee. And these elected delegates then go to the party's national convention where they vote for their candidate. This is like the Coachella for politicos. You know, where you get to see things like Clint Eastwood shouting at an empty chair. And it's there that the presidential nominee is officially announced. But first, primaries. There are closed primaries where only registered party members can vote in a secret ballot, open primaries which have a secret ballot system but are open to anyone, and then there are caucuses, where people usually vote publicly. Let's break this down. Caucus goers get to debate and openly declare support for a candidate. They do that by gathering in groups to be counted. So, no voting booths. Candidates need 15% support to stay in the race. If they don't get enough support, they are non-viable. And caucus goers get a chance to persuade others to join their group or switch to another. In the 2020 Democratic primary season, these 6 states will hold a caucus. That includes Iowa, which goes first. The results there are usually a good indicator of who might win the nomination, because since 1972, 7 out of the 10 Democrats who won the Iowa caucus went on to become the Democratic nominee in the general election. Take little-known Governor Jimmy Carter, who won Iowa on his way to the presidency in 1976.
He paid attention to Iowa, which was going first, and convinced the media that it actually mattered. And he won Iowa. He was the top candidate. And that gave him momentum to New Hampshire and to later states in the primary process. He ultimately won the nomination and won the presidency. It started the whole idea that Iowa mattered.
Or take this guy, who was mostly trailing in the polls behind Clinton. When he got to Iowa,
on this January night, at this defining moment in history, you have done what the cynics said we couldn't do.
the push generated by a victory in Iowa is what makes candidates spend a lot of money and time campaigning there. But that's also where some of the faults in the process really start to show. Iowa and New Hampshire are the first two states to nominate their candidate. They're pretty rural and very, very white. They're not representative of what the rest of the country looks like. And that's led to criticism that putting them first gives those states an outsized influence.
There's a lot of concern that perhaps starting in a place like Iowa, or honestly New Hampshire, which comes next, limits the chances of more diverse candidates.
Before jumping out of the 2020 race, the former housing secretary and mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, brought this up.
We do need to change the order of the states because I don't believe that we're the same country we were in 1972.
In January 2020, there wasn't a single candidate of color left on the Democratic presidential debate stage. And while Iowa is considered by critics as a crucial state, only a sliver of Iowans are even caucus goers. In the 2016 caucus, just over 171,000 people turned up. That's less than 16% of the state's population. It turned out to be a close race between Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
I would say that the caucus is undemocratic because it does not bring people into the party.
This is Caroline Schoonover. She's the co-chair of Central Iowa Democratic Socialists of America. Her chapter didn't back a candidate for 2020. Instead, Caroline's been campaigning on local issues in Iowa, such as fighting rent hikes. She's been going to Iowa caucuses with her parents since she was a kid, so she has a pretty good insight into how things work.
It is not an event that is very exciting for people to want to be a part of, to give up 3 hours of your evening to be a part of a huge debate.
Because the caucus occurs at a set time and place, it can freeze people out.
The caucus system requires a lot of time.
You have to go there, you have to sign in. There's no privacy in the vote. You then have to wait to see if your candidate crosses that 15% threshold.
That could explain why turnout across caucuses is pretty low. It averaged under 10% in 2016. Compare that to the average turnout for states with primaries, which was just under 32.4% in 2016. In theory, the process brings large-scale democracy to the living room, but in practice, things can get a little messy. If you think scheduling caucuses and primaries is complicated, money takes it to another level. Candidates are tangled up in needing to raise money to even begin a campaign, a lot of money. That money is used to pay staff, hold events, and advertise. Most candidates rely on a mix of small donations and larger donors who can play a big role in determining their policies. This has been challenged by the fundraising model of the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's raised more than any of the other candidates in the last 3 months of 2019 by relying on almost 2 million donations fueled by grassroots donors. But many campaigns end before the first votes are cast in Iowa because they're not able to raise enough money to keep going. Meanwhile, billionaires like Tom Steyer or Mike Bloomberg have been financing their campaigns with their own money.
I'm not crying. I just have America in my eye.
Then there's the role of the media. If you think about it, a lot of American politics plays out on cable news and social media.
The news media occupies such an interesting place in our democracies, right? Keeping watch over the candidates that are, essentially applying for a job. But at the same time, most news media do have to pay attention to the bottom line. They have to pay attention to their advertising budgets.
So cable news is not entirely a neutral player in this dynamic. News media also frames the way the issues are discussed on the debate stage.
How do you answer top economists who say taxes of this magnitude would stifle growth?
You told her that you did not believe that a woman could win the election. Why did you say that?
We can see it with our own eyes, the ways that conflict, for example, drives the coverage, just as it drives news coverage in general. That is irresistible catnip for national media.
Remember, a lot of people are getting their news from social media and elsewhere now. And so presidential election campaigns are essentially mass media campaigns. And it's not just money and media that can shape a race separately from what regular voters want.
Superdelegates.
Superdelegates.
Superdelegates. Superdelegates.
You've probably heard of superdelegates. These are party leaders and elected officials who were given automatic spots at the Democratic National Convention. They've been controversial. In the 2016 primary, many of these superdelegates pledged their votes to Hillary Clinton before a single primary was even held. Since then, there have been reforms to strip back their nominating power. But in the event of a deadlock, superdelegates do get to vote on the second round of voting. Does it have to be this way? Candidates turn up and eat corn dogs in Iowa because getting face-to-face time with voters is seen as a huge benefit in the current system.
People can campaign in those early states in a one-on-one way. They can actually get to know the voters can actually get to know them. That is only possible in very small states like Iowa, like New Hampshire, like South Carolina. Once you move out of those small states, you're in a total media television campaign.
Caucuses are grassroots democracy in a way that we don't see in primaries. You don't get that in California, honestly. You don't get that in New York, sadly. You get it in these small places early in the process.
Those defending the system might point out that South Carolina holds the 4th nominating contest in the country. It means a state where roughly 60% of Democratic primary voters are African American has an early say in the process. In 2020, both California and Texas decided to move up their 2020 primaries to Super Tuesday on March 3rd. That's significant. These are the most populous and diverse states and have the most delegates. Yet, if the U.S. started this process from scratch, it probably wouldn't look the way it does now.
There are a variety of alternatives proposed, regional primaries, changing the first states, having a national primary. None of those have ever really happened.
Post-2016, there were some reforms, including curbing the power of superdelegates. A number of states also switched from caucuses to primaries.
If we got rid of the caucus and we started over with a completely new system here in Iowa, I think that a transition to a primary would be in Iowans' best interest. It would transition us to a one-person, one-vote system. It would be much more accessible. It would allow for voting before Election Day, absentee voting, which is only vaguely possible in the caucus system.
There are a lot of strange quirks in American elections, and updating the rules usually falls on the people least likely to want to do so, the party establishment itself. But with some states having a bigger role than others and self-funded billionaires skipping over parts of the process entirely, critics are asking whether it's time the Democratic primaries started to look a little more, well, democratic.